This is a D6 generation pip. One of those dots on the side of a six-sided die. Yeah, a pip. A short pip. Little something. About anything gaming related. Sometimes featuring Craig, sometimes featuring Russ. We'll see what's coming up today.
Hey everyone, welcome back. And Craig, we are super excited today. I am super excited. I'm very
excited. I am staring at a bunch of models on a Kickstarter page as we speak.
We have with us today none other than, we have. I don't know if you guys know this. So we have, of course, Will or Oz from Privateer Press, as well as William Hungerford or Will from Privateer Press. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if you guys know this, gentlemen, but actually 3/4 of this podcast today are all Williams.
Good.
Because my first name is also William.
This is true.
And so it's clear that William is a great name.
It is the best name ever.
And I would like to say, in solidarity, that today I have changed my name. No, not really.
So we're saying
you should.
We would make excellent Green Lanterns because we've got a ton of willpower.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
That's right. Oh, very good. Very good. And what's also fantastic about William is I think it might be the name with the most nickname derivatives because, of course, you got William, Will, Willie, Bill, Billy, and then, of course, you have the classic Liam, if you really want to. And how cool is our name that we actually sometimes take the last part off and make it the nickname? I just think that's pretty awesome. So anyway.
Welcome to the guys about the name William.
A whole hour about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We could. But speaking of names, I would love to talk about the brand new name that Privateer Press is launching here. And I would thank you so much, guys, for joining us on the show today. We are super excited to talk about the brand new game that Privateer Press has announced that you guys are currently kickstarting. And that, of course, is Warcaster. So very excited to talk about that today and all the excitement about that. But before we get into that, Craig, there's a question we like to always ask our guests on the show. Do you remember what that is? This is getting a little old school. But do you remember what the question is?
This is old school. First of all, I'd like to say that we're here to talk about Warcaster Neo-Mechanika, Russ.
Yeah. Don't forget the second part.
The subtitle is pretty much where it all rests on this one.
That's good. That's actually true because it gives us that little anime twist, which I love.
It does indeed. It's all that's old is new again. Yes. So we do have this question. Gentlemen, I'm going to ask Oz first. Oz, are you now or have you ever been a gamer?
Never. I would never admit to something so tarnishing for my record.
Your political career could be over in moments.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us about the Oz origin story, the Oz the Gamer origin story?
It's far too long to actually talk about and then save any time for Hungerford to even have time to speak, let alone for us to talk about Warcaster. But yeah, I've been playing games. I've been playing games forever. I got into miniatures game. I'm 45 almost.
Oh, you're a youngin'.
I'm kind of young for minis gamers. But yeah, I got into miniatures back in like 91, I think.
Yep.
When you could only buy metal, pretty much.
Oh, yeah.
And I've played a bunch of different miniatures games. I've been at Privateer Press since 2011, so I'm coming up on 9 years in a couple of months. I was at Steve Jackson Games before that, where I helped make Munchkin and a bunch of other things. And yeah, games aren't my entire life, but they're a major chunk and percentage-wise. If we're talking about ratios, then it's mostly games.
Cool. And do you remember the first game that sort of sucked you into this whole alternate world that we live in?
Well, my mom taught me how to play chess, and I don't remember learning. And I remember things that happened when I was like 4 and 5. So I can just imagine I've basically been playing chess since I could grab stuff.
Oh, wow.
As soon as my fingers kind of functioned and I had some sort of object permanence, I was playing chess.
Wow. Well, you can't fight against that as an origin story. But Will is about to try.
Well, so to answer the question, am I a gamer? Yes, I am a chronic gamer. I play as much and as many different types of things as I can get my hands on. I started when I was, I want to say 10 or 11 with Dungeons and Dragons. I had been playing Ultima 4, and my uncle, my step-uncle, who was in his 20s at the time, was playing D&D with a group of people. And because I was so enthralled by Ultima 4 when I was like 10 or whatever, I checked it out, and then I was done. Like, that was it. I was sucked in completely. I got my first miniature, which I think was a Raupartha, to be my first character in D&D, and then the miniatures love grew from there. Through D&D, I started playing Magic. Through the miniatures, I started playing every miniature game I could get my hands on. And it just kept growing and growing and growing to where if somebody has a board game day that's a friend of ours, like, hey, you want to get together and play stuff? I'm like, yep. Like, what are we playing? Doesn't matter. Let's go.
Nice.
Awesome.
And how long have you been with Privateer Press, Will?
Just over a decade. I started in 2010, in January 2010. So I just hit my 10-year mark.
Nice.
Yeah. I spent the first half of it. I was the quartermaster, which means I ran the press gang, the volunteer organization here. And then I transitioned from that into being the developer for all the organized play. From there, I got a position on the actual development team and have just recently, in the last, year and a half, 2 years, something like that, got promoted to lead developer.
Yeah, it's been about a year and a half.
And Oz is the development manager on the development team, so he's my boss. So I always have to make sure that I don't say anything to make him mad because he can fire me.
Oh, I'm a loose cannon.
He seems like an anger fueled monster.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So as a Privateer Press fanboy myself, I have to ask you guys, what are some of the projects that you've each worked on at Privateer that that folks might be excited to hear about, and which one are you which one do you consider kind of like your baby or your most, I don't want to say most proud of, but the one that really speaks to you, I guess?
So I'm currently in charge of Monster Apocalypse, which was my favorite game that Privateer Press had ever made until I worked here. So that's pretty cool. But most people would know me from the board games we produced, the Level 7 games and the Iron Kingdoms Adventure board games, Undercity and Widow's Wood. And I still have to say that Omega Protocol is my favorite of all the games I've ever worked on. We just did a second edition of that. Added some new stuff and cleaned up a couple of weird things about it.
I'm lead on Riot Quest and was recently moved into lead on War Machine and Hordes, as Jason Souls is lead on Warcaster, the game. We'll be talking about it here in a bit. Riot Quest I've been on since the start, and Privateer had not done anything like it. It's a super casual, super beer and pretzels hobby board game that, as the community has grown around it, our Facebook group for it, we see people playing with their kids, playing with friends that don't play board games, and that has been very cool to see, because, we're known for War Machine and Hordes. War Machine and Hordes is a very competitive, very deep game with a learning curve to it. And sometimes people would see that and be like, War Machine's a little bit more than I want, but I love the IK and I love the miniatures, but, I don't want something that with that much of a time commitment. And so games like Monster Apocalypse, like the RPG, like the board games, and like Riot Quest, I love to see people get to engage with the Privateer community when they might have felt a little intimidated. And Riot Quest has been an excellent entry point for that. And so that's been a really, really cool thing to be a part of.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, you guys did mention Warcaster, and Craig, I think we should talk about that at some point. So why don't we start now? But I wanted to ask,
probably hit it eventually.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah. But I wanted to ask you guys this. So I'm going to give you guys speaking of gaming, I want to give you guys a little gameriest challenge. So I'm going to ask for each of you to do an elevator pitch for Warcaster. So again, for elevator pitch, 30 seconds of why it's awesome, but I need two. One of you has to give the elevator pitch for the background and sort of the fluff and the story that is Warcaster. And the other one of you has to give the elevator pitch for why the gameplay and the mechanics are unique, innovative, and fun.
So
you guys talk amongst yourselves.
Or what?
Yeah, talk amongst yourselves, decide it any way you want, and then go.
I can do either one, Oz. Which one are you more comfortable?
I'll do narrative.
Okay.
All right, well, you got to go first.
Why don't we start with narrative? That seems good. We'll start with story, then we'll work our way into rules.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's good and good. It's a win-win situation. if you are a fan of War Machine and Hordes, the Iron Kingdoms, the setting that we've built over 20 years, then Warcaster has something for you in it. But if you're completely unaware of anything that's ever happened in those stories, then you're totally fine jumping into this from the beginning. Because the Iron Kingdoms as they exist in the current War Machine and Hordes timeline very much build the foundation for the society that grows on the Thousand Worlds as part of the Warcaster backstory. And all of that is happening right now in our flavor text stuff. We've got a Hingehold Scrolls Twitter feed that is a mad prophet telling stories about the end of the world. And all that stuff is building up to the moment where the teleportation gate opens up that lets humanity escape from the doomed world as they see it, from the infernals crashing in around them, and jump halfway across the universe to a new galaxy that's depopulated but is full of all kinds of gates. And then they spread out and they populate things from there.
So Warcaster is the far future?
Warcaster is 5,000 years after the current time stream. So we're taking and there's a bunch of shared words you've seen, because the word Warcaster is a thing in War Machine, and Warjacks are a thing, and even Mechanika is the magical technology that exists in the Iron Kingdoms. But the reason they're calling it Neo-Mechanika is that when they got to this other galaxy, magic didn't work the same way, so they had to figure out a way to make all their technology work. And then they had 5,000 years to expand and grow and evolve and learn new things and exploit all the resources there and bring themselves back to another horrible moment where things might all come crashing back down.
Of course. Awesome. So basically it's far future Iron Kingdoms, but science is the new magic, right?
Yes.
But there's a lot of familiar terms and everything else. Awesome.
Yeah. And if you thought that the steampunk robots of War Machine were just a little bit sci-fi, but not quite sci-fi enough for you, then we've gone full-blown sci-fi this time.
Yeah, and the imagery on the Kickstarter and what you guys have been sharing is definitely stuff. Cool. That's the background and the narrative. What about the mechanics?
So, Oz, I think you went over 30 seconds.
I might have went over 30 seconds. I have a habit.
You can have a little room. Will, you can go to
No.
also. Go.
I'm
He's going to time himself.
I've got a stopwatch in front of me. So I'm going to go 30 seconds.
I love it.
All right, starting in 3, 2, 1. So Warcaster is the culmination of 20 years of Privateer Press making games. So we've learned a lot over the years. It's a very modern game design. So it's a full-on tabletop war game with hobby miniatures. You can play on a 30x30 for smaller games or a 4x4 table for larger games. It's alternating activations. You get to customize your Warjacks, so no two are the same. One of the key points of the game is that your army doesn't start on the table. You actually teleport them in as the battle continues going, like an old RTS where you build out of your barracks. That's 30 seconds. I think I got like a decent amount there. 30 seconds.
Wow.
You get all the stickers for that.
You get all the points. Achievement unlocked. That was great.
No, I have more. I have more I could say, but that's the 30-second elevator pitch.
Well, we're gonna deep dive. We're not gonna let you guys off that easy. We're gonna get deeper.
Okay.
But what were your guys' roles in the project? I mean, clearly you're both passionate about this. You've been streaming all kinds of games. You guys play in them. You're talking about it on the various Privateer Press podcasts and other outlets. But what have you guys been doing on this actual project? How were you guys involved in?
Sure. So as in the development team, we all work on each other's games. So while Oz is lead on Monpoc and I'm lead on War Machine and Riot Quest and Souls is lead on Warcaster, we all work together. When we're lead, it means we're the one coming up with the main pitches of what the models will be and also writing rules from scratch, blank paper in front of us and creating the game mechanics. When you're assisting, it is taking the lead's notes and then basically finding things you feel are wrong, providing feedback, running play tests, and also providing different ideas. And each of us have provided ideas that I think became integral to what Warcaster was. For example, I know one that I did was the idea of your army doesn't start on the board. Yeah, I don't deploy my army and face your army. You start with a very small amount of models and the rest of your army is in reserve. And throughout the game, you are deploying void gates and you teleport your army down bit by bit, chunk by chunk, where you've placed the gates. I wanted an RTS feel to the game where we were going to use the whole table. We were going to use all of it, not just we're going to play in the middle and meet in the middle and just clash, Napoleonic style. We were just going to get in there. like we would use all aspects, and to do that we needed dynamic deployment. And so I pitched that, and then Souls wrote up the rules for it and took up the idea. So it's a combination of providing the feedback to the lead to help make the best product, and then occasionally offering up ideas and suggestions of things that could help shape the game.
Yeah. And we've been talking about a version of Warcaster for probably about 4 years now.
Yeah.
Matt had a thought about naming a game after the main character in War Machine and then building everything around that. And the evolution of that has gone for a couple of years before we actually started writing down rules. And I think my greatest contribution to it has been, like, a year ago, we had a mechanics and rules meeting, and then it ended, and it was 5-something, and a lot of people were going home, and Matt and Jason Souls were just going to sit around and talk about the storyline for a while, and I sat there with them because I had nowhere else to go that night. And 3 hours later, we came up with a lot of the basic concepts of where the world is and what's going on with things, and stuff that you don't know about fully because we haven't explored all of the setting, like some of the other factions that are fighting in this universe and that kind of stuff.
I feel like you were also pretty heavily involved in the Warjack customization options from earlier projects translating over.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Awesome.
What do you mean? What do you mean by the Warcaster? The Warcaster customization.
Oh, so
customization has been one of our other things that we knew from the get-go this game needed. Mm-hmm. So, like Hungerford said, we really wanted our earlier conversations, especially his push of the game should be about throwing models down the table and the flow of the game moving a lot, as opposed to our armies locked together over the center of the board and fight until one of us is dead.
Right.
The other part of that we knew we wanted because people have been begging since War Machine came out, basically, to customize their Warcaster or whatever else.
Yeah.
So a lot of our conversations were about that customization. So early on, we realized that to make this game drastically different from War Machine, we would take the Warcaster off the table so that it was a scenario game and you could not assassinate your opponent's one model and win the entire game. Because we wanted it to be
more narrative.
We wanted it to be more narrative, but we also wanted to provide a completely different experience than War Machine. We didn't want to just make War Machine in space and just copy paste all the rules over. We wanted to have it feel a lot different. So then we had to figure out how to customize elements of your army without you literally saying, well, I'm the guy on the table who's carrying the sword, who has the fireball spell and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So there's two main elements of that. You can customize your warjacks. So when you get a warjack, you can imagine it, if you're familiar at all with War Machine and Hordes, imagine it like the Juggernaut kit that has the Destroyer and the Marauder and the Decimator in it, if you can mix and match any of those pieces. So when you buy a Dustwolf, which is the Marcher World's warjack, it's got hard points, one on its shoulder, two on its arms, and then there are build points of you can put a flamethrower on the arm and a railgun on the shoulder, or a rocket pod on the shoulder, or 2 battle rifles on the arms, and all that kind of stuff. So, like Hungerford said earlier, no 2 Dustwolves have to be the exact same thing in your army, and you're also picking the Cortex, the magical brain, that runs that robot, and that has at least one special rule attached to it too. So the starters all have 2 Cortexes and 3 and 5 weapon options, so you can already start customizing it, and then other stuff will come out later.
And then you, and the narrative of the game is that you, the player, are the Warcaster. You are up in this ship in orbit, plugged into this machine where your energy is able to flow onto the battlefield and power the weapons and armor of all your soldiers that you're teleporting down. So you're this godlike entity looking down. You can't get killed. You can't be targeted. You are unassailable. So your Neo-Mechanika, your science magic, is represented by a customizable deck of 15 cards that have rules on how you build them. They're pretty simple to do. It's not like deck building is a massive part of the game, but it's you choosing the spells, the kind of spell effects you want. And you'll draw a hand of those. So in addition to playing the miniatures and their stats, you'll be able to throw this magic down basically from the heavens onto the battlefield and affect different things. But there's variance in that you're drawing the cards blindly. So when you play the game, you're not only customizing the spells you'll have available, you're not only customizing the arm, like the weapons your jacks have, but your force, the soldiers, the solos, the jacks you bring, there's a cap on how many you can have in your reserves. And this is not a game where you can get tabled. You summon a unit on the board out of a void gate. If it dies, it goes back in your reserves. It pops back onto the ship, and it can be summoned again later out of a different void gate somewhere else in the battlefield. So the only way to win this game is to choose one of the narrative scenarios and play to win that. And they may be symmetrical for more competitive play, or they may be asymmetrical for more casual play. But there is no, I kill all your dudes, or I kill this one particular leader. You have to play to the story in order to win.
I love that. That's also a big change from the Privateer Press games of old, and actually quite a few miniature games out there too, which is really nice to see.
Yeah, I would say it's like a complete change from Privateer Press, and a very, very interesting new mechanism compared to any other game.
Yes, and so Monster Apocalypse has the same idea that the little units, your little tanks and your jets, when they die, they can be summoned back. But that game is about killing the other giant kaiju monster. When you kill the other giant kaiju monster, you win. War Machine, kill the caster, win. Riot Quest was the first real experiment into, it plays like a MOBA. You've got these heroes you're controlling, and when they die, they get knocked out in a cooler, and then they wake back up, and you can never be tabled. Your heroes are always waking back up. And then Warcaster was like sort of the final evolution of that idea of a game that you're always in. No matter what, you always are able to play, and you can never really – you can get put out of position. That's the strategy of the game. If someone – suddenly killing a bunch of soldiers on one part of the table and stopping you from deploying over there, but you're not out of the game. You can still be deploying somewhere else and trying to make a comeback. The game feels very like a giant tug of war across the entire table constantly.
Yeah. The other thing that's really refreshing about making armies in it is you don't have to do math. There's no this thing costs 15 points and this thing costs 12 points. You just, every single element of your army is a unit. So whether that's a squad or a solo or a warjack. And in a skirmish game, you play with 8 units, and in a full-on game, you play with 15. So it's more like building a deck in a card game where you can't have more than 4 of any one thing with the same name. And you might, in one game, decide you want 3 warjacks. In another one, you might decide you want 2. Whereas your weavers, which are your people that are casting the attack spells for you, they're your space wizards, basically, on the table. You might decide that your plan is perfect if you have 4 of those, but then maybe you decide, I need to take one of those out of this army because I want to have more squads, because there's more scenarios in this tournament pack or whatever that says that squads score points and that kind of stuff.
The balancing act there is that every unit has a summon cost, and you can only have so many summon points on a gate at a time, up to a max of 5. So summoning a single sniper might cost 1 summon point, while summoning a heavy warjack that's got 5 weapons on it might cost you 4. So while building the army, you don't have to do any math. All you have to do is pay attention is where you're allocating your resources turn to turn. And what do I want to summon over here? Do I need just a ton of soldiers, or do I need to bring the heavy armor?
One of the mechanics that I saw on one of the videos that I thought was pretty freaking brilliant was and Craig, I thought you'd find this interesting. So when you're summoning, right, you're allocating basically resources to a particular gate.
Right.
But you have to telegraph it, right? So the turn you put the resources on the gate, you can't be the same turn you summon.
Yeah.
And so you put them on there, but then your opponent has a chance to shoot the gate, and every hit, I'm going to get this, the details of this wrong, but every hit knocks off some of the resources on the gate.
Yeah.
So if you've got a really expensive unit you want to bring in, but your opponent gets the chance to knock off 2 of your resources, now you're like, crap, I can bring something in next turn, but I can't bring in the big guy I really wanted to because the gate's been weakened.
Yeah, that's what part of makes the tug of war, because you can only put a gate down within a certain number of inches of a model already on the board. So as you're playing the game, you're leapfrogging forward. You're having soldiers move up and then drop a gate. Then it's alternating activation. So I'm not doing my whole army at once. I'm doing just a couple things. My opponent goes, maybe they don't take the gate out, so now I get to summon some more guys. So now they move forward and they drop another gate over here. But if they can ever, say, kill a bunch of my guys and kill a gate, then all of a sudden I'm like, I'm cut off from this side of the board.
Yeah.
And that one thing we haven't talked about is the resource in this, because if anybody knows anything about Privateer Press, they know that we love resources.
I was going to say.
Every game has some sort of core resource mechanic. In Riot Quest and in Monster Apocalypse, it's the action dice, the white dice you use to summon things or to make attacks and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
In this game, it's a brand new type of magical energy, the lifeblood of the galaxy. It's Arcanescence, which we call ARC for short, so that you can say it faster. And And it's going to feel a little bit to some people. If you haven't watched any of the videos yet, go out and catch us on
YouTube,
Twitch or YouTube or whatever. Privateer Press Prime on YouTube is a good place to find our videos, usually within the same day that we did them anywhere else. So Arc is a little bit like your focus in War Machine, kind of conceptually, but you don't ever spend it.
Yeah, it plays totally different.
So you have a well of it, and that's how much you have as the Warcaster floating on the ship. And that will power up the spells you cast because that's the power you have. But you can allocate that arc out on the table, and unlike War Machine, you can give arc to every single thing on the table.
Soldiers, warjacks, whatever.
The reason the game's called Neo-Mechanika is that everybody is carrying Mechanika, and all Mechanika works better when it's powered. So the other cool thing about the game is every single model, and sometimes multiple weapons on a warjack, will have an ability that turns on when they're charged with arc, and then an ability they can spin the arc called spiking, which just gives it back to the Warcaster to use that ability in a special way. So the Ranger Fire team, the squad in the Marcher worlds, if they have arc on them and they're charged, their guns shoot farther. But if they spike to use that arc, they can move 3 inches. So you have all kinds of timing things of, well, I want to give this arc to people because also in addition to that, it makes you attack better. Or do I want to spike it like my hunter on the Marcher worlds in the game today? I spiked to reduce the armor against the target it was shooting.
Now,
but if I kept that arc, it would give me stealth, which would make me hard to shoot at from a distance. So making those interesting choices is a big part of the game.
And I do want to add real fast that if someone listening thinks that feels complex, one thing we shot for Warcaster is far less complex than War Machine.
Yeah.
War Machine's like a 96-page rule book. Warcaster, I think, is
36 or
36.
Something.
Oh, wow.
We want the game to be very approachable by casual players, and you can play it narratively. I'm sure there will be a competitive community around it, but this is not a super crunchy game. This is a very approachable tabletop game, and the whole arc mechanic is like a giant circuit board. And you have so much arc every turn. You're flowing between your spells, your soldiers, and your gates to summon people, and you're just choosing where it is every turn. The actual resolution of it is quite straightforward and very, very easy to do.
I think that part is going to be really interesting. And for our board game friends out there, it's got that, Privateer's always had that sort of Euro game mechanics stuffed into a miniature war game, meaning that you've got this resource you got to manage.
Yeah.
And I think Arc is particularly interesting in watching, your guys play videos. It is interesting to see, you leave it on models and it amps up their attack and damage rolls in a much milder way than boosting, but from War Machine, but in interesting ways. Sometimes very massive, though, because of their abilities. But then you also spend the same resource to play cards from your hand, or at least I'm going to get this terminology wrong, I know, but it affects the way you play cards from your hand. It affects what each model can do, but then it also affects how you summon.
Yes.
So you really got to make that tough. You're always going to have a turn where it's like, I know it's easy to understand what I can do. I just strategically aren't sure what I should be doing because there's so many options.
And
right.
Something to add to that real fast. We mentioned that the 2 ways you can play the game is with 8 unit choices, which is the skirmish mode on 30x30, and then up to 15 unit choices, which is a full 4x4. But you never have that many on the table at one time.
Yeah.
While you might have in a full-size game 15 units sitting in sort of your sideboard available to be summoned, I have never seen a game in any of our playtest games or in any of the videos we've done where you ever emptied out, unless we were playing the very starter level, which is 4 units per player. That's what you get in the starter boxes. You'll get all 4 of those out for sure.
Yeah.
But in bigger games, you're not having to keep track of my entire 15 versus your entire 15. Just stuff dies way faster in this game than it does War Machine.
Right. And I noticed a few things you guys did to keep those rules pretty simple. So there's a lot of tough decisions to make. Mm-hmm. But I noticed, and you mentioned you're trying to keep it simple, and I wanted to ask about that because I noticed a couple things in the video. There's no facing, so you're not worrying about front arcs and back arcs.
Yep.
And when you move units I know everything's a unit, but when you move a unit that consists of more than one model, you just move the leader, and then everybody else has just got to be placed within coherency of the leader. You've kind of baked into it the idea that that's going to allow you to leapfrog, but that's just part of how the game.
Well, you got that right almost. There isn't a leader.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about moving a specific model. You just move any member of the squad, and then you move everyone else. So it's even easier. Yeah. You don't have to keep track of the one model that's doing the moving. You can have a squad go one time and leapfrog, and then the next time they activate, be like, well, now I'm going to move off of this different model, and then have the other 2 leapfrog off them. It's meant to make that flow go as quick as possible.
Yeah.
Oh, that's super cool. I like that.
There's nothing as tedious as activating a 10-man unit in some game and then moving all of them and attacking with all of them. So one of our main goals in this game was speed. Of it's my turn, I'm going to do a couple of things, and it's going to be your turn. And so making squads 3 models on average, and then making their movement and everything else fairly simple was a big goal.
So one of the things too that you guys simplified and fixed, and then Craig, I'm going to let you ask some questions, but this is one of the things I wanted to talk about when you were talking about mechanics. So you mentioned briefly that it's an integrated turn system, right? Meaning that one player activates a unit, which is a warjack or a solo or a group of guys,
Yep.
and then another player activates a group of guys. And a lot of war games use that mechanic now. It's a very much more modern mechanic than the entire player side goes, the other player side goes. One of the challenges in that mechanic that a lot of games face is when your opponent makes a list that is much larger than your own in terms of activation counts, or when you've had a lot of attrition, one side gets an activation advantage, right? So if I have 10 units on the table and Craig has 4, I can choose which ones to activate in certain order, force him to make critical decisions before I move my important guys.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a classic problem whenever you have asymmetric unit counts in a game. What's interesting about Warcaster is you're going to have asymmetric a lot because you're not starting with everybody on the table. You're going to be summoning dudes. Guys are going to be wiped out. You're going to be summoning them back. So it's not going to be very often that everybody's at the same number of units to activate on the table. But you guys came up with this really, really interesting sort of, and I'll let you guys explain the terminology, everything, but these sort of turns and sub-turns that allow you to remove activation tokens and sort of fixes that challenge that most integrated turn games have. Can you guys describe that for me?
Well, that was one of our biggest challenges, and Hungerford came up with a fix for it, so I'll let him explain the basics. But it was interesting. Our original rule was if all your models have activation tokens, you take them all off. But then we realized the game was about summoning new models. So often you would be like, well, if I summon something, I can't clear all my models, but I want to summon something. So we had conversations about what to limit and how to track stuff, and Hungerford came up with the perfect solution for that.
So, everything you were saying about that inequality of activations that can build up in a game like this was something that was very much on my mind because I play a lot of alternating activation tabletop games. And the idea was you needed a counter. Since we knew we were doing narrative play only, there needed to be a counter that said when scoring happened, but this game had no rounds. It was just going constantly until the game met an end. So just came up with the idea of something we call a pulse round, which is that every scenario will tell you how many pulse rounds you play for. And a pulse round is made up of so many activations per player. So most pulse rounds will be, let's say, 5 activations per player. So each of us will get 5 activations where we go through our full turn. And then the pulse round ends. When it does, you check scoring at that point. So that means I can go in my earlier activations of that round, try and go get on the thing I need to hold and score. And you have a chance to counterplay and get me off there. And then when the pulse round happens, then we sort of reset everything and we check our scoring condition right then and be like, okay, I'm holding this hill, I'm holding this building, I've planted the bomb, whatever the scenario is. Be like, okay, I score points. Now we go to the next round. And we do our next sequence of 5 activations each, alternating. And the scenario will say, play for 3 pulse rounds, then whoever has the most points wins. Or if side A has achieved victory, then they win. If side B has held them off, then they win. That kind of thing. But in that was also the solution of activations was, if your turn begins and all of your models have activated at least once, then you can clear them off. But otherwise, at the end of the pulse round, no matter what, everybody clears all their activations simultaneously. So you always know, regardless of how many models you've summoned or have died or whatever, you have this regular clockwork ticking going, okay, in this many activations, everyone's going to get refreshed and I can go on. And I think I pulled a little bit of that from the war games I played and from the idea of like MMO and MOBA style cooldowns, where you have this thing you're doing and I'm going to do it, it's going to have this effect, and then in 3 turns, I'm going to be able to do it again. And you can plan around that, and it gave the right amount of player agency, and it also helped people not get overwhelmed by somebody just rolling really well and starting to just run the board.
Yeah, the most interesting thing about it, from my perspective, is that it says that there will be rounds where you won't activate everything, but we'll both get the same number of activations.
Yes.
So it feels very balanced, Whereas even if your army, if you have 2 or 3 more units on the table than me, unless you can manipulate activations with cards and other character abilities and stuff, we're going to still take the same number of activations back and forth.
Yep.
The other interesting thing that we put in this game versus standard alternating activation sequences is when we were first building all the models and testing what they did and stuff, we realized that squads were pretty powerful because they put out a lot of attacks and a lot of scenarios required them to score points. And warjacks were really powerful because unlike most models, they can attack with all their weapons and they tend to have more hit points and they have all the options and stuff. But we still wanted solos in the game. And solos didn't really have a good place because if you had to sacrifice an entire turn to move one model as opposed to a warjack or a squad of guys that were going to score you a point, then it was a feel bad. So in addition to the standard, you can activate 1 unit, I can activate 1 unit. We also get a bonus solo in each of those turns. So you're really activating 2 things per turn, but it lets you do cool combos inside your turn that aren't super complicated. And it means that your mechanic who's running around trying to keep your warjack alive doesn't have to eat all your activations to do his job and still be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And aren't solos the ones you can place gates near, or is it anybody?
Warriors are, so squads and solos.
Warriors. Got it. Cool.
Because they're in the fluff, they're literally throwing them down.
Yeah, they're kind of like grenades. They expand out, and they're temporary void gates.
So a warrior would be like a keyword that just means like any infantry.
Yes, yeah, basically anything that is not a warjack. And let's say in the future, if we ever decided to add, I'm not saying we will, but say we added vehicles to the game later on, they probably couldn't either. It would be soldiers, effectively.
Unless, and hear me out,
I'm listening.
You had like massive gate grenade launchers on your vehicles, and you could just launch like 6 gates out at once.
That sounds like a really interesting concept. We've never talked about before.
Probably break your game, but I mean, for that one moment.
Well, you'd be still restricted by arc, so you'd have lots of gates, but you still only got 6 arc.
Yeah, that's true. Is it 7 arc that you have total?
Yes, you have 7.
Yeah,
no matter what player you are, you always have 7.
Yeah.
So there you go. 6 of those gates, and they each have 1, and then your Warcaster can do nothing for the rest of the turn.
Well, and you can bring out a lot of solos, because the other interesting thing about summoning is you have the chance to either place a gate or collapse a gate, and then you have the chance to summon as much as you want to spend or to recall 1 unit. Uh-huh. So recalling is important because, like Hungerford said earlier, when your soldiers get knocked out, they're not dead, they get blipped back to your carrier.
Right.
But you can't put a squad back on the table if 2 of the guys are in the hospital back on the ship and one of them is still running around the table.
Yeah.
Right.
So there will be times, I even did it in the game today, where you might not have a great thing to summon, or both your gates might be knocked out because your opponent shot them off the table. But recalling a unit, and there are cipher cards that will do that kind of stuff too, is just as valid of a tactic in the situation as anything else.
Well, so sometimes you also just need to redeploy. You just need a certain type of soldier on a certain type of battlefield based on the scenario, what's happening. Right. Like, one of the scenarios is a bunch of arc geysers are going off, and it's random which points on the board you can go collect arc and basically score the victory points you need to win the scenario. And all of a sudden you might be like, oh man, I need my really fast scouts over here, but they're in Narnia right now, so let me recall them and redeploy them.
Now, you just said your 2 gates, and as I'm looking at the Kickstarter rewards, no matter how big the force you're buying is, it comes with 2 gate tokens. Is that a function of like the game mechanics as well?
Yeah, that's a balance thing. The starter comes with 2 cardboard gate tokens that look a lot like what we've been using in our playtest games on the streams, but then we hit a goal that was models for those.
But it is limit 2, and that was a gameplay thing. We tested a lot of different versions, all the way down to 1 gate at a time, which wasn't enough to create real dynamic situations, and then many more than that. We ended up at 2 because it's enough to let you as the player have to be able to spread out a little bit and be like, I might show up over here, or I might show up over here. I put 2 arc on this gate and 3 arc on this gate, so I can summon that many points, and your opponent has a chance to shoot arc off. But at the same time, it's not so many gates. Right. And so much arc spread all over the board that your opponent's like, well, I can't stop you from showing up anywhere at this point.
Yeah. It's probably a good thing.
A lot of playtests got us there.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's probably a good thing you're not letting giving the player enough rope to hang themselves with.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And there are cards like the balancing act is you've got the models rules, which can, a lot of them are offensive, shoot a guy, stab a guy, but you've got like specialists that are like, they can add extra arc because you are limited normally in how much arc you put on a thing every turn. The exception being gates. When you put down a gate, you can supercharge them a little bit more. But, say that you've got a gate that had been sitting there and it got beat up a little bit. It got beat down to 1 arc and you need to put more on it. You can only normally just put 1 on it during your turn. But there are like solos that can add more. There's cards that can add more.
Oh, cool.
And so with all that balancing act, that 2 definitely became the right number to do exactly what you said, not let the players hang themselves with the amount of options available.
Yeah. And that kind of reminds me of something else that I was thinking about from the very first inaugural video that you two put out, right? And I'm not wrong, it was you guys playing in that first game, right?
It's almost Oz and I.
We've live streamed 2 games, one about a week ago and then one today.
Yep.
And that's the only 2 games people have ever seen streamed from here of anyone playing.
Okay. But it was you guys?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, okay. And I believe it was Oz. Was it you who had all the cards that really weren't any good in your situation?
Yes, I decided. The way that mechanics work is you draw your hand of cards, your 5 cards, and then you choose what models you put down. But since it was the very first game and Hungerford had put down a unit or a warjack and a solo or whatever, I put down the other kinds of things to show off what they were, and then I realized that my hand had a bunch of cards. Because the thing we didn't talk about the cards, there's 4 types.
Yep.
There's overdrives, which affect only warjacks. Mm-hmm. There's geometrics, which affect only squads. There's furies, which are attack spells, basically. And then there are harmonics, which can affect numerous different things depending on what their card text.
Mm-hmm.
So if you draw an entire hand of overdrives and geometrics and you have only solos on the table, then your cards are a little bit less than useful.
Yeah, well, because we were trying to demo a bit during that first stream, I've made some questionable decisions
to do that.
Yeah.
Good question.
Well, my question though was: is there a mechanic for for hand management? Like I saw that you could discard a card or some cards, and I guess I didn't understand, or I don't remember. I think you did clearly.
Yeah. You can always discard 1 card before the end of your turn, before you draw back up to your hand size of 5.
Yep.
And then you get a chance to play 2 cards during your turn, once before you activate models and once after you activate models.
Okay.
So effectively, you can play cards that don't do anything really.
Oh, okay.
Like if you have a card that says remove an activation token off a model.
Yep.
And you don't really need to do that, but it doesn't hurt you at all. You can still play that card to do that, to get rid of the card.
It's very rare that you're in a situation where you're like, I've got a hand of cards that only affect warjacks, and I don't have any warjacks on the table during this one activation. Well, you've got 2 ways out. 1, you can discard a card at the end of the turn and draw a new one. And 2, just put your gates down, put enough arc on them, and plan to summon some warjacks.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Like, you can respond to that.
Yeah, because the cards can be very powerful swings if you have a good card and a good activation set up and all that kind of stuff. So often you'll end up keeping a card in your hand because you know it will be really useful next turn.
Right.
It's just I kind of boned myself a little bit in that first game.
Yeah. Well,
so
and then
kind of like
you were trying to show off all the different things.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting though is it sounds like since your whole army's not on the table right at the beginning, and you might have it sounds like the card draw makes it desirous to not think through your opening moves until after you see your hand, right? Like if you get into a system of like, I always like to summon unit, squad 1, squad X, and solo Y. The first thing I always do, and then you draw a hand of cards that affect your warjack. Well, maybe today you're going to start with your warjack because you've got a really cool opening move now.
Yeah, but Hungerford talked about that in an interesting way today during the stream too. Since only warrior models can put down gates, then if you get stuck with no warrior models, especially in the positions you want them to be in, you can always put a gate 5 inches off your deployment edge, but it severely limits your mobility basically in the game. So it's often wise to start with as many warriors on the table as you can.
But that's my personal preference.
Yeah.
Like I was just talking strategy today. Yep. You can absolutely go you look at your cipher cards and go, man, I've got some really powerful warjack stuff. I'm going to start with a warjack and a solo so that I have 1 warrior to throw an opening gate down. But usually if I'm going second, Because when the game begins, you only start with 5 summoning points worth of models on the board, which is usually going to be like a squad and a jack at most. So you're going to start with like 4 models on the table. And then you got to summon out from there. And I never want to, and there are some really, it's sci-fi, so there's really long range guns. Other thing we haven't talked about real fast, I want to cover in a second, but to finish my thought, I never want to get shot off the table and suddenly not be in a position to put down a gate and like start getting in there. Like I don't want to start off on the back foot, basically.
Yeah.
But
and that's a bigger problem in quotation marks in the skirmish mode, which is only a 30 by 30. So you get stuck in the action really fast versus the 48 by 48.
Yeah.
Think about on the table.
Well, we need to talk about what I think we should mention now, though. You guys are mentioning a lot of like it's important to have mobility. It's important to be able to get gates down early. You can't win by tabling someone. You can't win by killing their Warcaster. I think our listeners have a good feel for all the different things you can do and how the game works. But it sounds to me like missions are what are going to make this thing fun and are going to dictate what you do. So give us a little taste of like, what are the missions like? What's the mission variety like? And how do you how important is table control and how does that all work? And how important is mobility? And how does it all come together?
Sure. And the part of that I was going to mention that I want to bring into this is we promote using 3D terrain in this game a ton. Like,
nice.
It's on 1,000 Worlds. I want the hobbyists out there to build any kind of table they want. Lava table, ice table, a civilized table that's full of catwalks and buildings and stuff. The game accommodates all of that. And I feel like the more 3D you have, the better. And it makes the scenarios stronger, at least a better experience in my opinion. Because you'll have scenarios like there are these 4 arc relays on the board. You can't move them. They're stuck where they are. If you're controlling one, when the pulse round ends, you score a point. But there's this geyser that's shooting energy out, and you can have your models, and it'll specify which kind of models. Like I think this one is squads and solos, can run up and grab energy. And if they run it back to one of the relays, then when the pulse round ends, instead of scoring 1 point, you score 3. So you have this giant flow where you're trying to get to the thing and then get back. We'll have scenarios where you have sort of your base, then a middle ground, and then the opponent's base. Controlling points in your base is only worth 1 point. Controlling the middle of the field is worth 2. Controlling the points on your opponent's side of the board are worth more. So this is one where you want to spread out. Then we have things like there's a giant powered up ring, and it's got 6 points that make a giant circle around the board. Each of these points gives you points if you end up controlling it and taking it over, but 2 of them are active at any time, and it changes every pulse round, and they're worth more. Then we can do stuff like asymmetrical scenarios where it's one side is carrying something like a bomb, and the other side has a quadrant of the board they have to defend for so many pulse rounds. And if the attackers can get a model with the bomb onto the defender's base and plant it, then they blow it up, boom, it's over. But if they can hold them off for X number of pulse rounds, then they shut them down and they don't do it. The sky's really the limit on the scenarios. We can do this resource control, like I mentioned, with the geysers and running the things back to the relays, where it can be any part of the board. And then we can do more just straight up like escort the spy, plant the bomb, run alongside this cargo and try and deliver it to a point. The rules, the current sort of in layout beta rules are available for people to go read. They're on warcaster.com. And you're going to see these are sort of opening level narrative scenarios. They're like go hold points or go grab things and run them around. But we've unlocked one of the Kickstarter goals was more scenarios, and we're going to introduce all forms of play because, as you said, the game is completely scenario driven. It's completely narrative driven. So we want to appeal to all the classic tropes of warfare, and then also stuff that particularly fits into the Warcaster setting.
Awesome. So how many scenarios are you guys going to have sort of at launch? And then thanks to the Kickstarter, unlocks, what do you guys think the total scenario count will be like by wave 2 or so?
3 48 by 48 scenarios in the preview rulebook, and then 1 skirmish one.
And that's in the previews.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that preview rulebook is just it's like, you can tell from it, there's lots of hand-drawn things for scenario maps and placeholder text and that kind of stuff. I would guess that at least 6 per type of game in the core book, but that's probably the minimum. But we haven't talked about the specifics. Mm-hmm. I just know that there is a stretch goal for more scenarios, but I don't know if we've ever determined what the baseline versus more are.
Gotcha. What I'm excited about is the potential for campaign play in the future.
Yeah.
The game is the bones built to do full-on however we want to do it, campaign play with, if we want to do progression, if we want to do just a branching tree style, however it gets done, it's all the design elements are there to then explore that space as we release more stuff.
Well, I have to say my daughter and I are loving the Oblivion campaign for War Machine, so more of that, please, in any form, would be great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. So another thing that Craig and I talk a lot on the show are factions, and we sort of have a saying on the D6G, which is that the rule of 4, which is any miniature war game that gets to 4 factions has a much better chance of survival than any miniature game that has less than 4 factions. I know you guys have already announced 3 in the Kickstarter, with 2 coming out in the first wave, which is July-ish, and then the second wave is August-ish.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about like the play style differences in the first 3 factions, and then sort of the thinking behind how different factions might evolve and differentiate.
Well, the first 2 starter boxes that are coming out in that first wave are basically the organized empire and the people who don't agree with them. So the Iron Star Alliance, one of the things we didn't talk about earlier is that the gates that connect all the 1,000 worlds, they are leftover tech from a previous thing that's explored a little bit in the story, and we'll dive deeper into as we release the game for real beyond the Kickstarter. But these gates are not controlled 100% by humanity, and they're a lot like natural, like waterways and stuff. So civilization developed around the gates that worked the best and were most consistent. So the Iron Star Alliance is a whole bunch of corporations and government entities and small empires and stuff that really like law and order, and they are kind of the core worlds of the setting. And then the Marcher worlds, the second starter box, are the people that live on the edges and the fringes and the places that are either hard to survive on or hard to get to or whatever, and they don't like the rules so much, and they're very adaptable. So gameplay-wise, the Iron Star, they tend to have things that make them better. Like their Paladin Enforcer squad, their 3-man Paladin squad, when they're charged with arc, they can use their melee weapons and their range weapons in the same turn.
Oof.
And their Paladin Commander has the very same ability when he's charged. But then if the Paladin Commander spikes, he can remove an activation token off of a Paladin squad. So they're very much about militaristic synergy and stuff. Whereas the Marcher world, they have, like the Hunter, the sniper in that starter box, every time the Hunter makes a range attack, it can move 3 inches. So the Hunter's very dodgy and mobile. And then you're going to get, like the Warjacks. I believe the core rule in the Iron Star Warjack rule is that for every arc it has, it gets +1 melee range. So basically its energy weapons get more and more powered up and can hit you from farther away. But I believe the Duskwolf's ability is for every arc it has on it, it gets +1 speed. So mobility becomes a thing when you charge it up.
If I had to break them down into their simplest, like the 5-second elevator pitch, it would be Iron Star Alliance are superior firepower and synergy. Marcher Worlds are hit and run tactics and like guerrilla warfare. And then the Eternus Continuum are dirty tricks and phasing through walls and being just being naughty overall.
Yeah.
Naughty.
Yeah. The Continuum tends to kind of bend the rules more than other factions because, like Hungerford said, they can phase through walls. They also have a bit more stealth than anybody else. Their Warjack has a giant crab claw of doom.
Yeah.
So,
Hey, you can't harvest living people's organs without having a little help.
Yeah, they're the faction where people like, if they're like, give me the really fast version of what each faction is. I'm like, Iron Star Alliance, they are the law. Marcher Worlds, they're the scavengers who don't want to be part of draconian policies and want to live their own life. What are the Eternus Continuum? Cyberpunk body horror. They are dark RoboCop is what they are.
yeah. As if RoboCop wasn't a scary enough concept.
Yeah.
Right.
I love it. Fantastic. So should we, since there is, I know a lot of people are asking these sorts of questions, since there is this tie back to the Iron Kingdoms and this sort of relationship, even though it's 5,000 years and light years away, should we expect to see some of the races we've grown to know and love in the Iron Kingdoms eventually sort of having counterparts in the Warcaster universe, or is that something that hasn't been decided yet?
So, like you mentioned before, that 4 factions is a good place to have a war game. And I'm going to say that we agree with you, even though we've only shown 3.
Good.
But one thing that people have noticed is all the factions thus far are different forms of humanity. And people are wondering if there's aliens. We can't say anything just yet. But it is a very human-centric sci-fi story. It was humans that escaped the old world and went from Western Amaran and went out across the galaxy. And when they went to this galaxy, it was mainly unpopulated, and it's been them spreading out across the galaxy. So is there a potential for aliens? Yes, but I would be very surprised if you saw that anytime soon. I think you're going to continue to see when we look at where War Machine started, it was Narcator, Protectorate, and even Crix, which Crix was just undead humans, right?
Right.
So I think Warcaster is also going to start being a very human-centric war story and the different needs of humanity, whether that's safety and control or free will, or in the case of the Continuum, a desire to live through it forever, even if it is grafting your body into a robot. There's a lot of area to explore there, and we can make humans look alien when you look at stuff like the Continuum and how strange they are. Right. There is definitely connections to the old world, though. The Continuum has a solo called the Marauder, which is what's probably like maybe the brainstem and face of a person in this giant suit of like exoskeleton armor. And the name of the armor is Karchez armor, which if anyone plays War Machine, they know about Karchev the Terrible, who was the man in the machine. So there's little hints.
And like big.
Yeah, but you have to really imagine this game product-wise as War Machine when it first launched. Like Hungerford said, War Machine was 4 human factions and a couple of mercenaries that were non-human. So we'll explore the universe a lot, hopefully over the next 20 years and see where we go. But right now we're telling the very establishing, like this is the baseline of the history of the setting and that kind of stuff. And the universe, the Thousand Worlds, were populated by primarily humans that escaped from Cain when the Infernals showed up. And
because if it was up to me, we would have Space Gators on day one.
Oh, of course.
That's right. So what I'm hearing is we've got War Machine in space. That's terrible to say because people will think it's the rules. It's not the rules. But we've got War Machine archetypes in space. We don't have Hordes archetypes in space yet, but someday, probably, assuming everything goes really, really well, that might happen. Right?
And I want to make sure everybody knows it's a really big maybe. One of the things Matt said during the keynote when we first announced it was no elves. He said there would be no elves in space.
He said space elves specifically, I believe. He said no space elves.
No space elves.
Yeah, so there is no Signar Arcado here. If there are ever aliens, I wouldn't expect any of the traditional fantasy tropes. I don't think we're going to see space dwarves. I think it would be weirder than that.
Yeah, got it. Cool. Well, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Craig, what other questions do you have? We're running out of time. I want to make sure we get all of our cool questions in.
Yeah, no, I did have, it's more of a tactical question. I'm very curious. So if a heavy warjack is going to cost you, say, 4, and these are all just general guesses on my part from what you've said, and you can load a gate up with 5. So your opponent can just be sniping at that gate and try to keep it down. Have you guys, other than like you said, there will be solos that can kind of boost those. Have you guys come across like a strategy if you want to get that big guy onto the board? Is there a way that you've kind of come across doing like how would you like tactically go about doing that? If that was your goal, you really want to get your cool new heavy warjack onto the table.
One of my favorite tactics and one of the reasons I feel that 3D terrain is so important to this game. You could play on a flat board if you want to. I just personally don't recommend it. Is the ability to hide gates. Yeah. If you're playing on a dense terrain, I may want to put my gate up front forward on top of a building where it has the best viewpoint whenever I summon my guys so they can immediately go into combat. But I may be facing down a firing squad. So I may make the option to drop my gate in an alleyway so that I can summon in safety, and then it means I have to spend an activation running out there, but you won't be able to drop my gate.
Right.
Also, I will sometimes just present you with bigger threats. Like, if your choice is to shoot my gate or shoot the light warjack and the 2 squads I already managed to summon earlier, I want to make sure that you feel more threatened by what's coming at you than what might come. And so it can be a little bit of threat deflection. Right. That's 2 of my favorite tactics to try and make sure I get my big stuff out.
Well, and in the allocate phase at the beginning of your turn, you can put 1 arc on anything on the table, including gates. So like Russ said earlier, if you put a little bit of armor on your gate, like if you want to summon 4 points worth of stuff, and you put 5 points down on it, and your opponent knocks a couple of those points off,
Yep.
You can allocate one more point at the start of your turn. Like Hungerford did that in our game today.
Uh-huh.
He allocated one to it, and then suddenly he had 4 points. He could get everything he wanted out on the table.
Yeah.
And also, cover's really, really powerful in this game compared to some other games with what it does to the dice math and stuff. So even
I just like that idea, right? Like you can put the gate out there and hang it out, but and try to draw your opponent's fire and more threatening units. With the idea being, my gate's out in your grill because I'm just going to, as soon as I come in, I'm going to hit the ground running and be able to attack you. But then you run the risk of my opponent taking it down. But if I put the gate in that safer spot, either way out of range or out of line of sight or whatever, that's much more guaranteed. But now my jack's got a longer walk before he sees action, right? So it's a really interesting tactical decision, right?
And you could like we're talking about, the only thing that when it comes into play that you could put a bunch of gate Archon at once is a gate. You can load it up with 5, and you can pad a gate, right? If you're like, I really need this Warjack, it summons for 2. I'm going to put 4 on it. I think my opponent will knock a bunch of arc off it. That's a decision you can make. But the downside is that extra arc you're putting on the gate to try and pad it is arc you're not having on your soldiers to power their weapons or available to you to make your spells more powerful. And it's a giant balancing act of risk management. Where do I want my resources, and how can my opponent counteract me?
Right. That sounds awesome. So there's multiple options and multiple tactical choices for you to make, and then present them with more tactical options that they're going to have to try to fit into their decision-making tree, so to speak.
Yes. Yeah. But since you're doing limited activations each turn, you're luckily, and thus far in our experience, never overwhelmed. Right. You have a lot to think about, but you're never like having to do the whole army at once. You're just like, okay, I want to do this. Let me focus on this thing, and not. You never get analysis paralysis too bad.
Yeah.
Right?
Sometimes you're torn between two great options that you want to do.
A good place to be. Yeah.
But that's what makes it fun.
Instead of 30 semi-good options, and then you're like, I don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
Right. Awesome.
So I got a couple quick logistical questions. So people are listening. Hopefully they're getting excited. They want to get involved. They want to learn more. Mm-hmm. Obviously the Kickstarter is live right now. We're recording this on the 10th here of March. Yep. It's going to be live by the 11th, so it'll be live by the time you hear this. There'll still be some good time left on the Kickstarter.
Yeah.
When is I know you guys are kickstarting it to get everybody excited and to sort of get things going quickly, but I also know manufacturing is already well underway. When are you guys planning to launch this thing? When can people expect to get their copies, and how do they get involved?
So there are 4 waves of fulfillment in the Kickstarter. We are looking for wave 1 to fulfill in July, which is insanely fast for a Kickstarter.
Yeah, this is not a Kickstarter that you put there right now. You're waiting a year. You're going to have it in a couple months, or more a couple, but you know what I'm saying.
And for anybody who's overseas and is thinking about shipping prices, you can also tell us, I have backed up to wave 3. Please ship it all at once. Then you will have to wait until wave 3 stuff is all together, but you can get it all in one shipment.
Right.
One thing I want to say is the waves are going through Kickstarter, but then afterwards they will be through normal distribution in its stores. So somebody getting into Warcaster a year from now will be able to get the stuff that's on the Kickstarter at the moment at their local store. We're definitely still supporting local retailers. All our Mom and Pop, War Machine, RightQuest is all sticking through normal distribution. If somebody wants to get in it now, I recommend they go to warcaster.com. That'll be where all the news updates are. It's where all the rules are. They can go see all the rules and all the miniatures. They can sign up for the newsletter. And if they're listening to this when the Kickstarter is live, you'll have a link to the Kickstarter where you can go and check it out. We funded in 27 minutes when it went up.
Yeah.
And right now we're just knocking out the stretch goals. We've already unlocked some alternate sculpts and some new models, like the models of the Void Gates and things like that. But yeah, to learn more, warcaster.com, no matter when you're listening to this podcast, is where you'll find all the info you really need.
Yeah, and if you want to back it for a starter box right now and then wait until Gen Con and buy a bunch more, then that's totally a thing, because you'll get your starter box hopefully around July, and then you'll be able to come to Gen Con with something to play with, and then be able to buy extra product and expand your force.
Yeah. Okay. So are you anticipating that they'll be in stores by the end of the summer? That's cool. Or the Wave 1 stuff anyway?
I know on the Kickstarter says the estimated delivery date of Wave 1 is July 2020.
Yeah.
And so then I imagine that stuff would be in stores shortly after. That's one that we as development don't have the best answer for, because we don't work in the production.
We're at the beginning of the process, not the end. So,
but I would imagine that it would be in stores just soon after.
Yeah. That's cool. That's awesome.
That's awesome. And also, I want to be clear. want everybody to understand, if you missed the Kickstarter, not that you should, because if you're thinking about this, the Kickstarter's got some great opportunities for you.
Mm-hmm.
But there aren't Kickstarter exclusives, with the exception of like foil cards and some fun things. There aren't like, you'll be able to get everything after the Kickstarter that's there. It's just the stretch goals are getting cool things out sort of sooner, right? Is that fair to say?
And also, a lot of stretch goals get added to your pledge, so you might get a little bit better deal.
A better deal, right?
A lot of things people are doing is there are retailer pledges on the Kickstarter that have normal retailer discounts and so on, and a lot of communities that are like, we want to get in Warcaster, instead of them, the individuals backing, they're all pooling together with their retailer and having their retailer back one of the retailer levels so that they're still supporting local, which I think is brilliant and a great idea. And so that's another way you can do, and not only will you be backing it, but you also kind of make sure you have a community ready to go when a lot of it shows up.
The other thing is the very first model will be at Adepticon this year. Mm-hmm. We have the alternate Coalition Weaver, the Marcher Worlds Weaver, the one with no helmet, that we played on the game today. That model is going to be at Adepticon in a couple of weeks for you to buy. So if you want to even get something right now to start hobbying with while you wait, and that's a possibility.
Yep,
that's cool.
I do. Can I ask you to put one aside for me? I'm not, but if you do, if one does fall out of your bag and like into a nook and cranny, then when I come say hi to you, I can buy it from you in case they sell it quick. Just throwing that out there as an opportunity. Just
email John Swinkles. It's fine.
Russ, we will take care of you. Just come see us at Adepticon and we will hook you up.
I have a quick question about Adepticon. I'm going to jump in right here. I assume the answer is going to be yes, and we can move on to Russ's next question. But will we be able to play test this at Adepticon?
No.
No.
We've got to run a ton of. We're going to be running Monster Apocalypse events, RideQuest events, and then major War Machine and Hordes events.
Gotcha.
And a lot of the models that we would be able to produce earlier are being used for the Kickstarter photography and for the in-house streaming.
Gotcha.
And the rest of production is in production.
Gotcha.
So
we're playing with studio models mostly right now, which is terrifying.
Yeah, we're playing with the stuff you're seeing on the photography and is going to be on the box art. So
that must be terrifying.
We do not anticipate being able to have a demo set up.
Okay.
I mean, anything's possible, but I don't.
No, don't. Yep. All right,
That's
cool.
all right.
Well, there's plenty of videos, or at least 2, and I'm sure there'll be more.
Yeah.
There's plenty of videos, and you can download everything, the rules, the cipher decks, and a bunch of model stats, and try the game out for yourself right now. If you watch especially our first video and then read the rules, it should give you a really good baseline for playing your first game.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Oh, then who needs a demo? Okay, cool.
Great. We can see what's going on. Awesome. And you guys, for model materials, then I will let us go because we're going along, but we didn't talk about the model materials. Are you guys doing metals and resin? No plastics this time around? What are the thoughts on the actual material?
Primarily metal with resin where necessary. I'm sure the really big Warjack pieces will be resin, much like the really big pieces of War Machine and Hordes models are resin.
It's mostly metal though.
But it's primarily metal right now.
It's very reminiscent of the beginning of War Machine.
Yeah.
When War Machine came out with all full metal fantasy, it's a lot of metal. So hey, if you like big, heavy miniatures that you can use as a weapon if you have to, this is a good place.
Well, it feels like it gives you 2 advantages. One, us old school miniature gamers, we like a bit of metal now and then. But 2, are you guys doing your own manufacturing here in the U.S.? Are you avoiding the whole manufacturing problem with viruses in China and delays and all that? You're not worried about delivery time.
We still print some paper stuff in China, like card decks and stuff for some games. Yeah. But model production happens entirely, almost 100%, right here in our Seattle area office.
I mean, literally a few thousand feet away from where we're recording this are people spin casting metal right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's given the current climate. I think that's probably a very wise choice. So,
and Matt Wilson,
awesome.
Our owner and creative guy, he posted the very first update to the Kickstarter when it launched, explaining why we're doing this and about the materials and about the reality of the modern tabletop gaming industry and that kind of stuff. So if anybody is out there with questions about why we're using Kickstarter or why we're doing those kind of things, that first update is a really, really good thing that covers all those kind of questions.
Yeah, he basically wrote an essay that does a very good job explaining probably your most common question.
Awesome.
Excellent. Cool.
Well, guys, thank you so much for taking the time to share with our listeners all the exciting news about Warcaster. Craig, what's the full title? Go.
That would be Warcaster Neo-Mechanika, Russ.
I like that Russ is
Warcaster.
a bigger fanboy, but he can't remember the name of the game.
No,
Well,
I got a
I'm
good
all about
mind for
nicknames.
detail.
Well, to be fair, Craig's always been the fluff guy. Like, and I've always been the rules guy.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons I'm such a huge privateer fan is, and this is something that I really want to just commend you guys, and I know you guys are, carrying the flame on the rules design this way. Like, my daughter and I, I've been playing War Machine now since, I don't know, 2005 or something. And my daughter and I still play, but we don't play like every freaking day. We play like, once a month, once every other month. We can sit down and it's like riding a bike. We're just back into the universe. We're back into the rules. I can pick it up and go. And so one of the things that's always impressed me about your games is once you play it one or two times, it's there in your brain forever. It's just simple to learn and hard to master kind of thing. Right. And that's what's always been maybe a huge fanboy. Of course, the art's amazing. And of course, right from the early stuff Matt did all the way through now, of course, your design, I love all that stuff. But I've always been a real fan of how you guys make the whole thing come together. So, but Craig's always been the fluff guy, so he always remembers all the fancy names. I can't pronounce anything properly. It's really very embarrassing. But I do love the mechanics and I love the gameplay. So thank you both for
the whole concept of living body organ donor stealing into this conversation too. So.
Yeah, you did. See?
Yeah.
That'll give you a little idea into what I'm waiting for.
Well,
of course.
But thank both of you for having us on. It's been a ton of fun talking to you, and it's like I love podcasts like this where we just get to sit and chat, right? And it's not like super regimented, like question.
Yeah.
Like this is definitely my preferred way of having conversations about the stuff that we all love and care about so much.
And that's, I think, what most people like to listen to. If you guys are just trying to rattle it off, facts that we're like snapping questions at you, that's not fun to listen to either.
No, the 30-second elevator pitch challenge was fun.
Well, that's because one of you took it seriously and one of you did not.
Hey,
that's right. I'm going to challenge you again at Adepticon. So practice up. I'm going to hit you again at Adepticon.
I will never promise to be short-winded.
No, that's me too. That's my problem.
That's fair. Well, thank you again, gentlemen. Really appreciate it. And best of luck with the Kickstarter. I know it's always crazy running through these things, and hopefully we'll see you both at Adepticon.
Yeah, we'll see you in Chicago.
See you there.
Thanks.
Awesome. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
Achievement unlocked. You've made it to the end of another D6 Generation episode, the podcast whose humor has universally been acclaimed as not too horrible. Please let us know what you thought of the show by emailing us at info@the d6generation.com. If for some inexplicable reason you actually enjoyed this show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. Thanks for listening and happy gaming.